Alrighty, welcome to episode 269. Funny number. And this episode is going to be about New Mexico's rights being under attack. Their governor decided to declare a public health emergency. And she said for 30 days that all concealed carry licenses and I'm not sure if it was open carry licenses or open carry. Actually, no, you need a license to conceal carry in New Mexico. So all concealed carry licenses have been suspended for 30 days, and all open carry has been prohibited in the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Bernalillo County as a whole because there's been a rash of shootings that have occurred, according to the state government. And currently, Bernalillo County qualifies to be put under these exemptions by the governor because she declared it a epidemic of violence by guns. And there were about 3 shootings that occurred within the last year, within the last few months. And she said, okay, well, now we're just going to suspend all these licenses. You can't open carry. And if you have, I believe it was incidences of violence, of violent crime, what per 100 incidents per 1,000 residents of violent crime, you can't open carry or have concealed carry permits. So all those permits would be rejected. And this is an attack on the United States Constitution because you can't just unilaterally declare a emergency like this and then just say, okay, well, now your permits are gone. We didn't even see that with COVID. We didn't see that during 9/11 even, you know what I mean? And, I do want to have a special episode to talk about that. It's just hard to gather my thoughts on such a delicate subject. So a lot of the criticism from the governor came from when she was asked at a town hall about this ruling. A lot of concerned residents about, obviously so, their permits are getting revoked and they're being told, now you can't open carry or conceal carry. And she said, the Constitution is not absolute in the face of a public health emergency, and the oath she took is not absolute because safety comes first. And that's a terrible precedent to set, and that's absolutely unconstitutional and tyrannical because, your power is not absolute. Rights are absolute. Even in times of crisis or war, yes, martial law can be declared, but there's still respect for people's rights. I mean, there's been, martial law declared and then people still being able to voice their opinion and bear arms and such. The Constitution has been openly suspended. The only thing that was suspended was you can't gather in a public place. And then, within 48 hours, the martial law is lifted in certain cases. But, this is that was during the 2020 era. But now what we have here is a very interesting conundrum where she's saying that the oath she took isn't even absolute and that safety is absolute. That's pretty bad, especially during the COVID era where everyone was afraid of things. Like, your safety and fear should not trump someone else's rights. And if this precedent is allowed, it could be unilaterally used to suspend the Constitution of other states and even the United States Constitution. This is a dangerous way to go. It's going to result in a lot of people getting injured. It's going to result in a lot of people getting killed for just trying to voice their opinion and their rights. And it's going to result in loss of property and ultimately the loss of our democracy, which is odd because you would think the left would actually care about that. And I find it very strange that the inaction of this law was around the same time that New York State implemented its restrictions on firearms, where you had to be 21 to buy a gun, 21 to buy a semi-automatic rifle, and then get a permit to buy one. And now there's going to be ammo restrictions on September 13th, where you now have to go through a background check run by the state if you want to purchase a gun and now ammunition. So now you need to go through 2 background checks, and it's all run through New York State. It's not run through the FBI anymore, so New York State police are going to be overwhelmed. There's going to be a major issue with it's going to be a major issue. And it's interesting because even the anti-gun advocates, David Hogg, for example, was concerned, where he said, he's all for gun safety, but what did he say exactly? He actually had a where is it on my Twitter? I saw it on Twitter, and it was the one time I could actually agree with the gentleman. He said, I support gun safety, but there's no such thing as a state public health emergency exception to the U.S. Constitution. And this was retweeting CNN Politics tweet. New Mexico's governor orders suspension of open and concealed carry of guns in Albuquerque, declaring gun violence and drug abuse a public health emergency after a string of recent deadly shootings. So the main concern here is that there's a attempt to subvert the United States Constitution in the name of public health and emergencies. And the Democrats have been doing this really actually for quite some time. It started in New York with that assembly bill I spoke about where, back in 2014 even, they wanted to detain people for potentially having a disease. Then it got revamped during COVID. And now in March of 2023, Letitia James and Governor Hochul have appealed the strike down of that law where they both want to bring back the possibility of people being detained indefinitely if there's a public health emergency declared and they are suspected to have a communicable disease, and they'll be put in a detention center. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. And the woman those are Democrats, and the woman in New Mexico that said she wants to ban the open and concealed carry because of a public health emergency is saying that, she's doing it for the good of all New Mexicans and blah, blah, blah. But, it's all for suspending rights. And this is what a lot of 2A people have been saying for a while is that, the Democrats are all about taking away freedom, and the stopgap is taking away guns so that way they can implement other tyrannical policies like putting you in camps for an indefinite amount of time because you're sick, supposedly. So it's very, very concerning that we have that, and that, I understand, the fight to make schools safer. I've talked about it many times on the show where, there's so many other avenues we can take to make our society's gun violence problem dissipate or more minute. But having such a rash response where you're flying in the face of the United States Constitution by declaring a public health emergency and saying that constitutional rights are not to be respected, or they're not, they don't need to be followed once an emergency is declared. This isn't martial law. The only time the Constitution cannot be applied, where you can crack down upon constitutional freedoms that Americans usually enjoy, is during a time when martial law is declared, or I believe a time of war, and then martial law has to be declared. During World War I, martial law was declared, and strikes were broken up, union meetings were busted, all these other things. I think this was during 1916, 1917, if memory serves correct. So, in times of great crisis, usually war or terrorism, will those rights be suspended because we now need to secure the homeland. That's when the Constitution is usually suspended. But never, even during 9/11, World War II, World War I, the right to bear arms was never infringed upon. Most First Amendment activity was respected during that time. If it was Union or Communist, it was cracked down upon. But other than that, you still had your... not to be so passé about it, that it was an egregious violation to have your union meetings shut down and, your leaders imprisoned, or if you were suspected to be a communist, thrown in jail or have your meetings broke up. That's egregious to the First Amendment. But for the most part, if you wanted to go and protest, you could, even under that. So this is a very recent phenomenon where people are starting to actually target, the Second Amendment, target the First Amendment in this new age, the turn of the millennium. And the big fight over the Second Amendment, and I feel like why the Second Amendment is it's much more passionate, the debate over that, than the First Amendment, is because the Second Amendment is actually tangible. You can hold a rifle, you can hold ammunition. It's an activity. It's a full sensory thing, and when people actively try to change the law to make guns more difficult to obtain or difficult to use, or there's a lot of policies around it, you physically see the problem. Like if you have an AR-15 that's New York compliant, you physically have to deal with that. Like the law is actually you're interacting with the restrictions that the law places by having a gun that is neutered, where you have to basically break it apart to fucking use it. Very, very weird. It's a weird concept, but it's like it's weird to use guns like that, but it's also very interesting where you know, the psychological element of it comes into play as well, where it's like, oh, like this is actually like government interfering in my activity. So I think that's why there's so much passion around it as well. And of course, you know, the money you put into the hobby or the defense of your home as well. It depends how you're looking at it. You know, some people look at it as a hobby. Some people look at it as national and domestic defense. It really kind of depends on who you're talking to that day. I think what the governor's doing is dangerous. It sets a bad precedent, you know, where you could overrule the United States, because that's her reasoning by it. She said in a video during her meeting, and she had with the public, that, you know, when there's an emergency, you know, my oath and the Constitution are below the emergency. We have to deal with the emergency before our rights. And that's very dangerous. And that's a very dangerous path the Democratic Party is embarking upon. And, you know, I remember the old left, the old left. I remember the left before Trump got into office was not, they wouldn't be on board with this. They'd be like, well, look at the ramifications towards democracy. You know, I mean, you know, we're all for gun control, but my God, you know, you can't do that. That's insane. That's going to put us on the path towards dictatorship. We have to go through the legislative process and the Constitution. Like, we may not like the Second Amendment, but, you know, there's also the First Amendment and the Third Amendment and the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. We have to respect the Bill of Rights as a whole, because overall it's going to be a slippery slope. Now they're just like, yo, fuck it, repeal the Second Amendment or use dictatorial powers to get rid of it. You know, it's seen as if there's a mass shooting almost every day, and it just isn't really the case. And if there is a mass shooting, these people are usually on the radar for years. Nicholas Cruz was on the radar for like 5 years. People knew he was fucked up and he was going to do some crazy shit, and it happened. Adam Lanza, the guy that kicked it all off with the Sandy Hook shooting. The dude secluded himself in his room for like, I think 6 months, and only communicated with his mother through email, and she would buy the kid guns. These are very preventable things, and it kind of comes down to a household level and also like the school level. Now, you know, the first guy was out of school for years. He was 27 when he did that horrible crime to these children. But Nicholas Cruz, he was 19. You know, maybe he was 19 when he did it, and there were like 5 years of documentation beforehand where the school was like, yo, this kid is crazy. We need to do something about it. So there's a lot of things already in place, and there's a lot of laws already in place to prevent stuff like that from happening. There was even a gentleman at the hearing with the governor of New Mexico. I forget how to pronounce her name, but she, the guy was like, yo, why are we doing all these orders when there's already laws in place to prevent this from happening? Like, you know, if someone's going to murder people, like, they're going to go to jail and face the penalties for that. And she played it off, and she said, you know, when there's too many New Mexicans that feel unsafe to go to a baseball game or take their kids to school, so their rights also matter too. Quoting a Supreme Court case back in the 60s and the 70s where, you know, the rights of others, when the rights of others are interfered with, your rights don't matter. Basically, this was coming into, it was the First Amendment ruling of, I forget what it was, but it was the famous line said by a Supreme Court justice where it says, you can't shout fire in a movie theater, meaning there are limitations on your free speech. And she was using that to say there's now limitation on your rights. However, that ruling was only used when it came to free speech. Now, the concept, yes, you know, as a concept, it is generally applicable that when your rights interfere with another person's rights, they generally stop. But the thing is that the Second Amendment isn't necessarily, it's not like you can't have speech, like, for example, restrictions on speech. Yes, you can't shout fire in a movie theater. Just like you can't use a gun and kill someone maliciously. There's improper ways to use something that is initially viewed as a right, and there are consequences for that. It always was the case that if you killed someone, like you murdered someone, or you committed an act of terrorism, you were put to death or you were put in jail for a very long time. It's always been common practice. It's up until recently that you can't say fire in a movie theater if there's no fire. And, it's basically establishing consequences for the misusage of things initially viewed as social positives, such as rights, civil rights. You can't shout fire in a movie theater. You can't shoot someone with a gun maliciously. These are already laws that are in place. So the governor of New Mexico, she really doesn't understand what she's talking about when it comes to interpreting the Constitution, because she thought it would be a really good idea to basically ban an entire practice and the ability for New Mexicans to keep and bear arms in the name of safety, when there's already precedent in place for that. There's already jail time. There's already the consequences. Even I think the death penalties in New Mexico, they have that. So what's really the to do this is really just a power grab, because there's already consequences for hurting someone or killing someone, just like there's consequences for shouting something, or if you shout a bomb in an airport when there's no bomb. Those are felonies, because you're causing chaos and mass confusion, and people can get hurt or killed from the panic of that, or it could divert resources. It's dangerous. So we already have these precedents in place, and to go further with them instead of attacking the root cause is really tyrannical. If you wanted to figure out why people are really killing themselves, like I said, look at their background, look at, poverty levels, look at mental illness, look at the red flags people have been posing for years, and then now they're starting to call, shootings in the inner cities mass shootings. Well, you already know that the problems in there is systematic poverty, and generational poverty, and high cost of living all over the country. So you have the economic issues down pat. Sometimes they'll even throw race in, but most of it's economic. So we really need to look at the economics and the psychological here, instead of just saying, okay, well, you can't open carry, and all your licenses for concealed carry are suspended for 30 days, and this order may be renewed for another 30 days, just like in the COVID era, right? I don't see how that's going to help solve anything. Hasn't solved anything in the past, and never will. And it's a flagrant violation of New Mexicans' rights, and it's going to set a dangerous precedent for the rest of us in the country, where other Democratic politicians are going to try and do the same thing, suppress our rights to bear arms, leaving us vulnerable and naked, so they can continue to push laws that want to put us in camps if we're supposedly sick. They basically want to put us in concentration camps. So I can't see how people are letting this slide. A lot of New Mexicans are very angry. A lot of people around the country are very angry over this. So we're going to see how it develops in the coming days. I'm wondering if we're going to see a Bundy Ranch Part 2. That would be very interesting to see. I know them Southwest folks don't play around. So the next few days will be interesting. I know that the sheriff of Bernalillo County said that he is not going to be enforcing the order, and New Mexicans don't have to worry about it, because they think, the sheriff is like, I have an oath to uphold, so we're not going to enforce this law. But we'll see what happens. And also, there are exemptions for law enforcement put into this order, and still they're not going to enforce it. So it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out. Definitely keep you guys updated on it. Anyway, this is episode 269. Thanks for listening, and until next time.